The ferocious dog dragged the 4-year-old girl across the yard. When the mother ran to her, she discovered a terrible creature that almost killed her daughter. The sun hung low in the sky, casting warm hues over the lush garden as young Laura giggled and tossed a small, battered ball across the lawn. Her dog, Coco, a muscular Labrador with a sleek black coat, chased after it, his paws pounding the earth in excitement. They were the perfect pair, innocence and loyalty, bound by joy. But today, Coco was different. Laura laughed and clapped her hands. "Go get it, Coco," she called out, her voice light and carefree. Coco lunged for the ball, but something else caught his attention. He froze mid-step, his stance stiffening. His nose twitched, and his ears perked up, alert. Slowly, Coco positioned himself directly between Laura and the tall, swaying grasses at the edge of the yard. Laura cocked her head, curious. "What's wrong, Coco?" she asked, inching toward him. But Coco stepped sideways, blocking her, his gaze locked on the dense foliage a few yards away. Every time she tried to get closer, he nudged her back with his body, his eyes flashing with a strange intensity. "Coco, it's just the bushes," Laura laughed, tugging playfully at the loose fold of his collar. But Coco wasn't playing. Suddenly, a low, rumbling growl escaped his throat. A sound Laura had never heard from him before. Her laughter faded, and she took a step back, sensing something was wrong. Coco barked sharply, his voice booming and unrestrained, and then, as if to emphasize his point, he clamped his teeth on the hem of Laura's dress, pulling her gently but firmly away from the edge of the yard. Laura's surprise turned to confusion, and she began to resist. "Coco, let go! It's just my dress, silly!" She twisted, trying to pull free. But Coco didn't relent. His growling grew louder, more insistent, as he dragged her backward, step by step, away from whatever had captivated his fierce, unyielding gaze. Laura's protests turned to frightened cries, her eyes wide, pleading. Across the yard, Amanda, Laura's mother, had been quietly watching her daughter's laughter from the kitchen window. She saw the sudden shift in the scene, the strange, stiffened stance of Coco, the way Laura stumbled, her face stricken. In a heartbeat, Amanda was out the back door, rushing to her daughter's side. "Laura!" Amanda called, her voice sharp, her heart racing as she sprinted toward them. Coco was growling deeply, holding onto Laura's dress, pulling her away. But Laura's cry of fright pierced the air. "Mom! Coco won't let go!" Amanda reached down, grasping Coco by the collar. "Coco, stop it! Let her go!" she commanded, tugging him, but Coco twisted free from her grip, turning toward the bushes once more, his body rigid and low to the ground. Amanda turned to the bushes, following Coco's line of sight, and her blood ran cold. In the shadows of the swaying grass, she saw it, coiled and motionless, a thick-bodied snake, its scales glinting dully in the fading light, eyes fixed, ready to strike. Amanda sucked in a sharp breath. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice catching. "Laura, get back!" But Coco didn't give the snake a chance. With a fierce snarl, he darted forward, his muscles bunching as he charged at the snake. Laura shrieked, trying to rush forward, but Amanda held her back, her arms wrapped tightly around her daughter. "Stay here!" Amanda's voice trembled, but she held Laura firm. Together they watched as Coco reached the snake, his jaws snapping with precision. The snake struck, its movements a flash of deadly speed, but Coco was faster, ducking low and driving his weight into the serpent, his teeth sinking into its thick coils. For a tense, terrifying moment, Coco grappled with the snake, the two animals locked in a deadly dance. Phoo! Amanda could see the danger, the possibility of Coco getting bitten, but she couldn't look away. Coco held his ground, his growls fierce and protective, his loyalty etched in every tense muscle of his body. "Chris! Chris, help!" Amanda screamed, her voice laced with desperation. In a heartbeat, Chris was there, a solid presence against the fear swallowing her. He held a thick branch, grabbed hastily from the yard, and with swift precision, he struck down hard, forcing the rattlesnake back, until at last it slithered away, defeated. Coco, breathing heavily, staggered backward, his eyes still locked on the spot where the snake had disappeared. His legs trembled, his fur disheveled, and his breaths came in shuddering gasps. He had done it. He had protected Laura, kept the danger at bay. But the cost of his bravery was clear as his body gave out beneath him, collapsing onto the sunlit grass, his eyes closing as the venom coursed through his veins. No, no, no. Amanda's hands shook as she knelt beside him, her fingers gently resting on Coco's head. Laura sobbed, clinging to her mother's side as she stroked Coco's fur, whispering promises, soothing words, even as her own tears fell, each one an echo of the fear and gratitude tangling in her heart. "We need to get him to the vet, now." Chris's voice was steady but strained, his eyes reflecting the weight of what had just happened. Gently, he lifted Coco, carrying him to the car, as Amanda gathered Laura, whispering words of comfort she wasn't even sure she believed herself. The ride to the animal hospital was tense and silent. Laura held Coco's paw the entire time, her small hands trembling, her eyes filled with a desperate hope that her friend, her protector, would somehow be okay. The family prayed silently, the air thick with anxiety as they pulled up to the hospital. Inside, the veterinarians moved swiftly, administering antivenom and stabilizing Coco as best they could. Amanda and Laura sat in the waiting room, their hands clasped together, as though through that touch alone they could will Coco back to health. The antiseptic smell, the sterile walls, all of it seemed distant and unreal as they clung to the memories of Coco's warmth, his strength, his loyalty. Hours passed, and finally the vet emerged, a soft smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "He's not out of the woods yet, but he's responding well." "Coco's a fighter," she said, her voice steady, bringing a rush of relief over Amanda and Laura. Amanda let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding, pulling Laura close. "He'll be okay, honey. Coco's going to come home," she whispered, her own voice a quiet promise as they held each other close, grateful for the second chance given to the friend who had risked everything for them. The sterile white walls of the veterinary hospital felt heavy, closing in on the Robinsons as they sat huddled in the waiting room, eyes trained anxiously on the double doors that had just taken Coco from their sight. Silence lingered between them, each lost in their own sea of worry, eyes drifting from the floor to each other and back again, unable to speak but sharing a silent resolve not to leave until they knew he'd be okay. Amanda held her breath, a barely concealed shiver moving through her as images from 4 years ago rushed back, vivid and unrelenting. She still remembered those first weeks after Laura was born, the endless days and even longer nights, each one filled with a blend of exhaustion and grief she couldn't quite shake. Her beautiful baby girl had come into the world with Down syndrome, a reality that had plunged them into a murky fog. All the expectations she'd had, the dreams she'd clung to during those long months of pregnancy, they all shattered in an instant. Laura was a quiet baby, as if sensing the weight her parents bore, and even her small, warm presence hadn't been enough to dispel the dense cloud that had settled over the Robinsons' lives. As Amanda sat in that waiting room now, every detail of that time returned. The feeling of helplessness was intense, Every day seemed like a question she didn't know the answer to. How would they support Laura, nurture her in a world that might never see her for the bright light Amanda knew she was? And the silence at home weighed heavier each day. Her husband, Chris, had tried to be strong to reassure her, but Amanda could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the way he'd stare out the window, his thoughts miles away. They had survived 2 years like this, 2 full years of Laura's tiny voice being mostly silent, her little legs unwilling to walk. Doctors had tried to reassure them, reminding Amanda that every child with Down syndrome developed at their own pace. But still, there were days when despair slipped in, drowning out any small hope Amanda held. And it was during one of those dark days, sitting across from her doctor with Laura in her lap, that someone had gently suggested, "Have you thought about a therapy dog?" A dog? Amanda was skeptical at first. She didn't see how a dog could reach through the fog that had wrapped itself around Laura. But as time passed, the idea took root. Maybe a small hope was better than no hope at all. She and Chris had talked about it back and forth until, one afternoon, they found themselves standing at the entrance of a therapy center. And there was Coco, a gentle, golden creature with eyes so kind it felt as if he saw through every worry and fear in her heart. From the moment Coco entered their home, the change was almost magical. Laura, who had always withdrawn into her own world, seemed captivated. The first night, Coco lay beside her crib, not moving, simply watching over her with unwavering patience. Amanda watched from the doorway, her breath caught in her throat, as Laura reached a small hand through the crib bars, fingers brushing Coco's soft fur. It was a moment so simple, yet so profound. For the first time in 2 years, Amanda felt a strange warmth start to bloom in her chest. Over the weeks, Coco became more than just a dog. He became Laura's companion, her silent protector, the one who coaxed smiles from her with soft nudges and gentle play. On the days Laura refused to leave her room, Coco would sit beside her, occasionally nudging her shoulder or dropping a toy by her side, as if to say, "I'm here." And somehow, without words, Laura seemed to understand. It was a warm Sunday afternoon, the sun casting a golden light into their living room. Laura, hesitant as ever, had watched Coco run in circles, his tail wagging wildly. And then, without warning, a small, bubbling giggle escaped Laura's lips. The sound was like music, filling the room, and Amanda had nearly cried with joy, the weight of 2 years lifting, if only for a moment. Now, Amanda's gaze drifted back to the double doors where Coco was being treated. The dog had changed everything for them, but most importantly, for Laura. He had shown her a world of trust and warmth and helped her find her way out of her shell. They had come to realize that Coco wasn't just a therapy dog. He was family. From the very moment Coco crossed the threshold of their home, a gentle shift began. Amanda noticed it in the small, previously overlooked moments, how her mornings, once filled with a quiet dread, now carried the soft patter of Coco's paws on the hardwood floor. His routine, unhurried and deliberate, brought a comforting cadence to their lives. Breakfasts became a shared affair, with Coco nestled at Laura's feet, his watchful eyes and gentle nudges coaxing smiles from her that had been rare and fleeting before. Laura, who had spent her early years cloaked in a world that felt impenetrable, now found herself drawn into the light that Coco radiated. Her first tentative steps were taken with Coco by her side, his sturdy frame a constant source of support as she wobbled forward. Each movement, each stumble and recovery was met with a patience that Amanda hadn't realized she'd been holding her breath for. And when Laura's laughter, fragile as spun glass, began to fill the rooms of their home, Amanda felt the tight knots within her own chest begin to loosen. "Look at her," Amanda whispered to her husband one evening as they watched Laura giggling on the floor, her small hands buried in Coco's fur. "I can't remember the last time I saw her so." He nodded, his eyes reflecting the same mixture of hope and disbelief that Amanda felt. "It's like she's finally found a door she can walk through, and he's the one who opened it for her." They both understood the truth in those words, felt it deep in the marrow of their bones. Coco had become the key to a lock they had feared might never open. His unwavering presence had given Laura the courage to explore a world that had once seemed too vast, too daunting. Her babbles and the few jumbled words she managed were music to their ears, each syllable a testament to the life Coco had breathed into their little girl. It wasn't just Laura who felt the transformation. Amanda and her husband found themselves drawn into the small victories of everyday life, their days now marked by a burgeoning sense of hope rather than the weariness that had once settled over them like a shroud. Amanda rediscovered the joy in the mundane, taking walks with Laura and Coco through the neighborhood, savoring the simple pleasure of her daughter's delighted squeals as Coco playfully darted around her. These were the moments that stitched their fractured world back together, the threads of normalcy mending the tears that had threatened to pull them apart. Yet, as they began to rise from the depths of their shared sorrow, the fragility of their newfound peace was thrown into stark relief when Coco fell ill. Seeing him laid out on the vet's table, his breaths shallow and labored, struck Amanda with a fear so sharp it nearly brought her to her knees. "He has to be okay," Amanda murmured, her voice barely above a whisper, as she stroked Coco's soft fur, her fingers trembling. "He's brought us so far. I can't imagine what we'd do without him." Her husband wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. The sterile white walls of the veterinary hospital felt like they were closing in on Laura and her family. Every tick of the clock seemed slower, stretched out, like the anxiety coiled tight in Laura's chest. The doctors had warned them that Coco needed intense care, an anti-venom shot, fluids, pain relief, all because of the toxic venom that had coursed through her faithful dog's veins. And here they all were, waiting, fearing, hoping for Coco to pull through. "Coco's tough," Laura's mum said quietly, attempting a reassuring smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. But Laura saw her mum's hands shaking as she adjusted Coco's blanket, touching the little dog like she was afraid he might break. Laura could see it, see the fear etched in her mum's tense expression, feel it in the way her dad just stood there, fists clenched and eyes fixed on the floor. All of them hoped, but it was the kind of hope with a thin, fragile edge. The hospital bed was barely large enough for Coco's little frame, his body so still it hardly looked like him. Coco's breathing was shallow, soft puffs of air that Laura focused on intently, as though she could will him keep breathing if she only watched hard enough. Her fingers brushed over his back in a slow, rhythmic motion, just like she used to when he'd fall asleep at the foot of her bed, his soft snoring a comforting lullaby on countless nights. And now she held her breath, counting each of his, praying there would be another and another. "Oh, Coco," she whispered, voice trembling. "Why did you go and do that? You should have just run away." Her voice broke and she bit her lip hard, holding back tears. She knew why he hadn't run, of course. Coco had always been there for her, ever since she could remember. Every scratch on her knee, every lonely day at school, every sleepless night filled with storms, Coco was there, just lying beside her, warm and unwavering. He was there when no one else seemed to understand, and he was there today, putting his tiny, brave body in harm's way to protect her. As the hours dragged on, Laura could feel the tension shift. Coco's breathing had steadied slightly, and though he still looked weak, there was a glimmer of life in his eyes. And when those familiar brown eyes met hers, she felt a surge of something that was almost a smile, almost like everything was going to be okay. Coco was trying to wag his tail, just a feeble twitch, but she felt it like a promise. "Hey, Coco," she whispered, reaching to gently pat his head. "You're doing so good, okay? Just hang in there. We're all right here." Her mum nodded beside her, squeezing Laura's shoulder, and her dad cleared his throat, murmuring, "Good boy, Coco. You just keep on fighting." Coco's eyes were weak, but they glistened with that same light she'd always known, trust, loyalty, that unbreakable love. Laura's heart swelled painfully, and she couldn't hold back the tears that spilled silently down her cheeks. It was like Coco was telling her, "I've got this. I promised I'd protect you, didn't I?" And he had. He'd fought with everything he had to keep her safe, to keep his family safe. Even now, lying there, his strength dwindling, Coco's gaze told her everything she needed to know. He was at peace with his choice, and he'd do it again without hesitation. Days of intense treatment and watchful care had slowly peeled away the fog of danger that had engulfed him. The toxic bite had nearly claimed him, but through it all, the quiet, gentle hands of the veterinarians and the unwavering love of his family pulled him back. Bit by bit, Coco's strength returned. He was not yet the lively, tail-wagging protector Laura had always known, but glimmers of life were in his eyes, and every heartbeat brought him closer to home. Laura's small frame peeked around the door every morning, her face a mix of anxious hope and a child's innocent courage. She hadn't missed a day, hadn't failed to show up with a soft word, a gentle pat, and her hand reaching out for Coco's paw. Her mere presence became Coco's beacon, her tiny fingers curling around his soft fur, grounding him with the silent promise, "You're coming home." Every time she looked into his eyes, her own fear melted. She whispered little secrets to him about how she'd rearranged her room to fit his bed right beside hers, about the snacks she had hidden away to surprise him. The days moved slowly, each bringing Coco closer to the life he had known, to the girl who had always depended on him, and he on her. He began responding more each day, lifting his head slightly when she spoke, his soft brown eyes following her as she moved. The hospital's sterile walls melted away when Laura was there, replaced by memories of open fields and carefree days, and Coco, though weakened, found a bit of the spark he'd once had. On the 7th day, the doctor looked at Laura's parents, a reassuring smile breaking the news they had been desperate to hear. "Looks like Coco is ready for the next step. He's a fighter. We think he's ready to go home." A shiver of relief, nearly disbelief, swept over Laura's mum and dad as they exchanged glances, tears brimming at the edges of Laura's mum's eyes. They had prepared for the worst, braced themselves for heartbreaking goodbyes, yet here was this miracle, wagging his weak tail as though nothing had changed. Coco would go home. He would see his yard, his bed, his family. He would see Laura again without the weight of pain holding him down. As they prepared to take Coco back, Laura could hardly contain herself. She flitted around the room, making sure Coco's blanket was perfectly wrapped, that his little toys were ready for him. The drive home was silent, punctuated only by the soft sound of Laura humming and Coco's quiet breaths. Each mile closed the distance between the fear of the past days and the familiarity of home. When they reached the house, Laura threw open the door and rushed to get Coco, gently coaxing him out. She lowered herself to the ground, patting the grass beside her. "Come on, Coco," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Coco hesitated, his body weak but his spirit willing. He slowly stretched his limbs, then, step by step, he made his way out, finally feeling the cool earth under his paws again. The moment Coco set foot on his lawn, he lay down, breathing in the comforting smells of home. Laura knelt beside him, her little hands finding their way to his soft fur, and for a moment they were lost in each other's gaze. It was a memory they'd both carry, one etched deeply into the heart of their friendship. For Laura, this homecoming was the most profound gift she could ever receive. And as for Coco, he simply lay there, his eyes closed in the safety of her touch, finally at peace in the only place he'd ever call home. Those early days back home felt different, quieter, more precious. Each time they shared a laugh or a meal or just a quiet moment in the evening, it felt richer, as though a warm blanket had been wrapped around the entire family. The memory of Coco's bravery was a constant presence in their minds, reminding them of the lengths one can go for love and loyalty. It seemed to infuse their home with an unspoken gratitude, a newfound warmth, as if they all knew now, in a way they hadn't before, just how important it was to cherish these little moments. Laura's mother would catch her sometimes, just sitting next to Coco, talking to him in that soft way of hers, confiding in him her dreams, her little secrets, and her fears. By the time Laura was 12, she had already felt the depth of loyalty in a way that many would take a lifetime to understand. Coco, her beloved retriever with fur that had once gleamed like golden fields in summer, was beginning to slow down, his legs growing weary, his muzzle touched with the silver of age. To Laura, Coco wasn't just her pet. He was her silent confidant, her partner in countless escapades, and the keeper of every secret whispered in the safe sanctuary of her room. He knew everything about her, every scraped knee, every tumble down the backyard hill, every tear shed when school was too tough, and every giggle when life was too good. Coco had watched her grow from a toddler with chubby, dimpled hands that grabbed his fur a little too hard to the 12-year-old girl she was now, wild, curious, and fiercely devoted to her loyal friend. They had their routines. He would wait patiently by the door every morning, his eyes soft and expectant, ready for their first walk of the day. His gentle presence was a constant in her life, something she could count on without question. And as Coco aged, Laura grew more mindful of his little aches and pains, slowing her steps to match his, letting him sniff the air for as long as he pleased. She would gently pat his head, whispering, "We're in this together, Coco. No rush." When the day came for Coco to rest for the last time, Laura felt an emptiness that she had never known before. It was a quiet goodbye, with her fingers buried in his soft, greying fur, and her heart aching in ways that words could never touch. Her parents tried to comfort her, reminding her that he was old, that he had lived a long, good life. But those words felt hollow to her, because Coco had been more than just a companion. He had been a constant. Years later, after she'd long since left behind her childhood bed and moved to her own apartment, Laura would find herself returning to those simple memories with Coco. On lonely nights, she'd pull out an old photo of him, his eyes wide and trusting, his mouth slightly open in that familiar. She would trace his face with her fingers, feeling the warmth of those memories, feeling once again like the little girl who believed she could take on the world as long as Coco was by her side. She'd sometimes even catch herself talking to him, almost like he was still there, sharing the little moments of her day. "I got a new job today, Coco," she'd say with a small smile. "And you would have loved the park I found downtown. You'd have so much space to run, buddy. There was a pang of pride mixed with nostalgia, a bittersweet reminder of the life she once had and the loyal friend who had seen her through it all. In the quiet moments when she felt the weight of adulthood pressing down on her, those memories of Coco would resurface, grounding her, reminding her of the girl who had loved without restraint and who had been loved in return by a creature so simple, yet so profound. That connection, the unconditional loyalty Coco had shown her, was something she carried with her always, a quiet strength in her heart, a whisper of love that stayed even as the years passed. And even though life continued its unrelenting pace, Laura knew that in some small, important way, Coco was still with her, a part of her own heartbeat, a piece of her soul. Wow, an amazing journey, right? Coco's bravery, the loyalty, and the bond he shared with Laura and her family. It's just incredible to see how our pets are truly there for us through thick and thin. Coco didn't just protect Laura that day. He reminded all of us of the strength and love that animals bring into our lives. So, what do you think? Do you have a story like Coco's? Have you ever had a pet that was there for you when you needed it most? I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. Share your own amazing stories with us. And hey, if you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed with notifications on, so you don't miss out on any more incredible stories like this one. Thank you all so much for watching and being part of this journey with me. Take care of yourselves, hug your pets a little tighter tonight, and I'll see you in the next video.